This video will walk you through week 8, and in week 8 we're going to talk about Python. And what is Python? Well, Python is a programming language which is very easy to learn. We're just going to type python.org, and from downloads, the one that I would recommend for you to download is you're going to scroll down and you're going to download version 3.4.4. Right, so depending on what operating system you have, if you have a Mac, download one of these. I would get this one if you're on a Mac, and if you're on a Windows, I would do this one right here. Okay, and depending on what kind of Windows you have, you might have to use this one. So once you download and install the software, you open it by typing idle. So whether you are in Windows you're going to type IDLE, and if the program is installed, it's going to open. And on Mac, the same thing, you're just going to type IDLE, and if the program is installed, you can open it. All right. So what is idle? Well, this is the program where Python programs will run. So this is where they run, and if you want to start writing a new program, you go File, New File, and this is where you would write your script. So let's say this is going to be saved at, I'm going to save it as on the desktop as first program. Save it. And if I wanted to show a message, then I write this and I press run module, and there's where the program runs. Okay, so that's basically how we write, save, and run programs. So why am I showing you this? I'm showing you this because we've had to do a lot of coding in our programs, and it makes sense for me to step back a little bit and explain to you what that code means. So what are the different things that we encountered in GameMaker, and let's just examine them in Python. So first of all, some of the things that we saw in GameMaker were comments. And what is a comment? Well, it's an explanation to what your code is doing. So for example, I can go in there and I can write this line in my program, and then when I run my program, you will notice that it's still unchanged from what I used to do, right? So the comment that I wrote, this line of comments that I wrote, does not affect the actual code. So comments are just explanations for us programmers to understand what the program is doing. So now the next thing is variables. What are variables? Variables are words we make up to store some kinds of information. So for example, this is a variable named feet. There's another same variable named feet. So variables can change their values. So here it is equal to 3, and then later on it's equal to 6. That's why they're called variables, because they change their values. This information can come from the user. The user can type information into our program. So for example, if I wanted to have the user type information, then I would do something like this. And then if I wanted to show the information that was entered, I can do it like so. Right, presenter feet, 10 feet. So there you go. I entered the number 10, I pressed the enter key, and as soon as I did that, we stored the number 10 into this variable, and then right after that, I showed you the value 10, preceded by this text in quotes. So this is known as output. Information that comes out of the program is output, right? So that's output here, and then we had another output down there. And information that goes into the program is known as input. So that's input. If we want to enter integer, which is a whole number, we do int input. If we wanted to do a float, we would do float. And if we wanted to do a string, then we would just do input, like so. Okay, so that's basically, in a nutshell, output and input. Now, other things we could have in our program is processing, which is basically some kind of a math that our program could do. So for example, based on the number of feet that the user has entered, then I can determine what is the total number of inches by multiplying the feet by 12, right? And then later on I can show you print inches is equal to inches. So that's an example of some processing that we did. Okay, now other things that we have done in our GameMaker code is encounter true, false, and conditions. So condition is when you compare two things to each other. When you check to see if one thing is less than another, or one thing is bigger than another, or if two things are equal to each other. Those are examples of conditions. So how does the computer know if something's true or false? Well, it can compare things. So if I go in there and I say 3 equals 3, and I run the program, right? If I run my program, and what I'm doing here is I'm using multi-line comments. So anything that starts with 3 forwards to 3 quotes and ends with 3 quotes is marked as green and is not going to be considered as code. So I'm just disabling my code this way. Right, so 3 equals 3, you can see that the computer automatically knows if that's true. And if I do 3 equals 4, then the computer will know that that's false, right? So how does the computer know? Well, it's built into the processor, right? The arithmetic logic unit can compare two things to each other using the relational operators. And these are the relational operators. With these relational operators, we can create conditions. And what are conditions? Conditions are when we compare two things to each other, right? The variable A to a variable B, or a number 1 to a number 2. Those are examples of conditions. Using these conditions, we can create selection, right? So for example, let's say I have this code right here, which is simply, initially I'm making a variable which is equal to 55, and then if my age is less than 18, I'm going to show this message. And if my age is bigger than 21, I'll show this message. So obviously I should be showing this message if the selection works correctly, right? And if I go less than 18, then I should see the first if execute, right? So this is an example of what we had to do in Xcode as well. How does it work? You have an if, you have some kind of a condition. If the condition is true, we're going to execute whatever's inside of our if. And the way we tell Python that things are in my if is by indenting them equidistantly from the left, right? So everything that's lined up the same under the if is going to happen when and if this condition is true. So those are examples of conditions and selection, right? So this was your selection. And then another thing is repetition. So repetition is a way to repeat something a certain number of times. And one way we've done that is with using loops. So here's an example, right? In Python, for example, we could have a variable x, which is going to be entered by the user. And then depending on what is the value of x, that is going to determine how many times the loop is going to happen. So for example, if I go in there and I enter 3, then this loop, this while loop, is going to happen 3 times. Why 3 times? Because it's going to continue to repeating itself until count is less than x. Well, initially, as soon as I hit the enter key, then my value 3 is going to be entered into the variable x. So x is going to be equal to 3 as soon as I enter 3 here. So then count equals 0. Is 0 less than 3? Yes, it is. So we're going to show hello one time. Then count is going to increase its value by 1. So count was 0, now it's going to be 1. Then we're going to go and show another hello. Then count is going to increase its value another time, so it's going to be 2. We're going to go through the loop a third time. We're going to show another hello. And now count is going to become equal to 3. We're going to go back to the beginning of loop. We're going to check to see, is 3 less than 3? Nope. And that's where the loop is going to stop. So as soon as I hit this, there you go. So these are some examples of things we've done with Xcode and how they're done in Python. Now, another thing that we've done is working with functions. What are functions? Well, they're just words that we make up to group a bunch of codes together. So let's say, for example, I'm going to copy this here, and this is going to be the definition of a function named message. How do I know it's a function? Well, it has parentheses after it. All functions have parentheses. So this is how we're defining this function. And whenever I execute this function, whatever is indented underneath this function is going to be executed. So how do I execute a function? I call it. And how do I call a function? Well, here's an example of how you call a function. So you just write the function name. As soon as you do this, we jump to the function definition and we execute everything that is inside of the function body. Okay? So every time I call the function, I jump to the definition and execute whatever's in it. Okay? So let's go and run this again. And actually, I'm going to disable this code here so I don't have to enter things again. So I run it. And there's the message, right? Hello world that showed. And if I call the function again, then we're going to show this twice. So this is examples of function definitions, function names, function calls. These are terms you should know because they are widely used and Game Maker uses them. The other thing to show is a function with parameters. So what is a function with parameter? Function with parameter is one that has a variable in between the parentheses. That's the parameter. It's known as a parameter. You could call it whatever you want, right? You can name it A if you like. How do we call a function with a parameter? Well, we have to provide something. So I go show, and then I have to say, give it some value, right? As soon as I do that, now this value 10 is going to be sent into the function. A is going to be equal to that, and we're going to show parameter equals 10. So the value 10 itself is actually known as the argument, right? So the value that we're sending in is the argument. So as soon as we call the function, our parameter becomes equal to the argument, or A becomes equal to 10, and then you can see that it is. So that's an example of a function with one parameter, and then in here you could see examples of function with two parameters and how we would call that function, right? And actually this is an example of a function that not only has two parameters, but it also returns a value. So this is the first time we have a function now that returns a value. So if we call this function that returns a value, so let's say I call add 1, 2. If I call it like that, you're actually never going to see the value that it returns, right? So the last thing we saw was whatever this thing showed us, but this call didn't show anything. The reason for that is because we're sending the values 1 and 2. These two variables become equal to that. Then this becomes equal to 3. Then this is we're returning the value 3. We're going to bring back 3 here, but we're never showing it. So how do we show it? Well, I could call the function from inside of a print. All right, so this is an example of how a function returns a value. Okay, so we're calling the function, we're jumping back to the definition, we're adding these two values, we're bringing the value 3, 3 goes right in here, and it's the same that we just saw right now. Okay, so that's how a function call works, and that's what's been happening in the programs we've been writing.